The unease at my son-in-law's retirement celebration wasn't something I could point to directly. It sat in my chest like a stone I'd swallowed. Present, heavy, impossible to ignore, while everyone else laughed and lifted their glasses and congratulated Nate on 30 years with the firm. I'm 69 years old. I've been reading people since before most of the guests in that backyard were born. 41 years running a regional insurance brokerage teaches you things no MBA program ever could. You learn to watch hands, not faces. You learn that the person asking the most questions already knows the answers. You learn that charm, real charm, doesn't announce itself. My son-in-law's charm had always announced itself. I noticed it the first time my daughter brought him home. The handshake a half second too firm. The eye contact a beat too long. The laugh calibrated perfectly to whatever my wife said. My wife, God rest her, thought I was being unfair. "You'd find fault with the Pope if he came to dinner," she told me once. And I laughed because she wasn't entirely wrong. But I watched. I always watched. The retirement party was held at the house my daughter and her husband owned in Scottsdale. A 5-bedroom Spanish colonial with a pool they'd bought 4 years ago. The landscaping alone cost more than my first car. I'd helped with the down payment when they were short. That's relevant. I want you to understand that before anything else. My daughter, I'll call her my daughter because that's who she is to me, more than any name would capture. She was moving through the party with the particular exhaustion of someone who has been performing happiness for hours. I recognized it because her mother used to wear that same expression at her sister's Christmas parties. A smile that reached the eyes just enough. A laugh that came just a moment too late. There were maybe 40 people there, colleagues of Nate's, neighbors, a handful of people I recognized from their wedding. I stood near the outdoor bar talking to an old friend of mine, a man named Stu who'd sold me my first car in 1987 and somehow become one of my closest friends in the 35 years since. Stu leaned over at one point and said quietly, "You doing okay? You look like you're running calculations." "Always," I said. The party had been going about 2 hours when my phone buzzed. It was my accountant, a woman I've worked with for 18 years named Bev, and she was calling about the trust restructuring I'd initiated 4 months earlier. I'd recently sold the brokerage. The sale closed 6 weeks before the party, and the number, after taxes and fees, was significant. I won't put a figure to it here, but it was enough to change the shape of a life. Several lives, potentially. I stepped away from Stu and walked around the side of the house to take the call. The conversation with Bev was brief. She needed to confirm some transfer instructions before the weekend. I gave them. The whole call lasted maybe 7 minutes. When I came back around the house, the party had shifted. The catering staff had brought out a new round of drinks. Champagne. For a toast someone was apparently organizing. My glass was sitting on the table where I'd left it, near the outdoor bar. And my son-in-law was standing directly behind it. He moved away when I came into view, casual, natural. A man simply standing in his own backyard. I have spent decades watching people position themselves. I know what it looks like when someone moves away from something deliberately. There's a specific quality to that kind of movement. Too smooth, too early, too precisely calibrated to your arrival. Like a chess player who made his move 3 turns before you saw the board. I didn't look at the glass right away. I looked at him. He was already talking to someone else, laughing at something, his back partially turned. But he glanced once, just once, in the direction of my glass. Involuntary. The way people look at something they've already decided not to look at. I walked to the bar and asked the bartender, a young guy in a white jacket, if he had any of that same champagne poured fresh. He said sure and handed me a new glass. I thanked him and left my old glass on the counter. I want to be clear about something. I didn't know what had been done. I didn't know if anything had been done. What I knew was that a man I had never fully trusted was standing behind my unattended glass immediately after a phone call he had no way of knowing the content of, except that he knew I'd just taken it, and he knew I'd just taken it, and he knew I'd been talking to someone about money. I stood with my new glass and watched the toast happen. My son-in-law raised his glass with the rest of them. My daughter smiled. The sun was going down over the mountains, and the light was that particular gold that makes everything in Arizona look like a painting. 20 minutes later, I went to find my daughter. She was in the kitchen refilling a tray of appetizers, doing the thing she always did at parties. Helping, staying useful, staying just busy enough to avoid long conversations. I asked her if she had a minute. She looked at me and knew, the way daughters know, that this wasn't small talk. "Is everything all right, Dad?" "That depends," I said. "Has anything been different lately?" "With Nate, I mean." "With the two of you?" She was quiet for a moment. She set down the tray. "Why are you asking me that right now?" "Because I need to know before I decide what to do next." She didn't answer immediately. She picked up a paper towel, folded it once, set it down. Then she said, "He's been asking about Grandma's trust, the one you're restructuring. He asked me twice last month if you'd told me the new numbers." I nodded. "Has he asked you for anything else?" "He asked me to sign something 3 weeks ago. He said it was a formality for the refinance. I didn't sign it. I told him I wanted our own attorney to look at it first, and he said it wasn't a big deal. It could wait." She looked at me steadily. "It could wait until I mentioned it to you." "You mentioned it to me." "I just did." There are moments in a life when everything you suspected quietly assembles itself into a shape you can finally name. This was one of those moments. I didn't feel anger exactly. I felt something older than anger. The flat, tired recognition of a thing you hoped you were wrong about. "Go back to your guests," I said. "Don't say anything to him tonight. Don't change anything. Can you do that?" She was her mother's daughter. She could do that. I went back outside and spent the rest of the party being perfectly pleasant. I talked to Stu about his grandson's Little League team. I complimented the neighbors on their new fence. I ate 2 of the bacon-wrapped dates because they were genuinely excellent, and I watched my son-in-law watch me, each of us completely aware of the other, neither of us showing it. Before I left, I retrieved my original glass from the bar area. The bartender had pushed it to the back corner. I picked it up carefully with a cocktail napkin and set it in the small paper bag I'd asked for under the guise of taking some leftover appetizers home. The next morning, I drove to a private lab in Phoenix I'd used once before for a business matter. I won't say more about that. I handed over the glass and paid for a rush panel. They said 48 hours. It was 39. The results came back on a Tuesday. The glass contained traces of a benzodiazepine, specifically the kind that dissolves cleanly, leaves no taste, and in sufficient quantity causes pronounced disorientation, memory impairment, and in someone my age with my particular heart condition, potentially something worse. The lab contact explained the findings in careful, clinical language. I listened to the whole thing and then I sat in my car in the parking lot for a while. I thought about my wife. I thought about the fact that she'd been gone for 4 years and I'd spent most of those 4 years restructuring my estate slowly, carefully, trying to do right by my daughter and by the causes I'd spent my professional life building toward. I thought about the look on my son-in-law's face when he glanced at my glass. And I thought about my daughter folding that paper towel in her kitchen. Then I called my attorney. His name is Gordon. He has been my attorney for 22 years, and he is the kind of man who, when you call him with an unusual situation, says nothing for a long moment and then says, "Tell me everything from the beginning," which is what he said, and I did. Gordon was quiet again after I finished. Then You still have the lab report in front of me. And the glass? In my attorney's office, theoretically, in about 3 hours. I heard him exhale slowly. I'm going to make a call, he said. Don't speak to your son-in-law. Don't speak to your daughter about specifics. Just go home. I went home. I made coffee. I sat on my back porch and watched the quail that come through my yard every morning. The little family of them with the top knots like question marks, pecking their way across the gravel. My wife had loved those quail. She'd named all of them, changed the names when she couldn't remember the old ones, named them again. I missed her in a specific way that afternoon. Not the general ache of absence, but the particular missing of someone who would have known exactly what to say. She would have been furious, and then practical, and then she would have made me eat something. The next 10 days moved in a way that felt both slow and sudden. Gordon worked with someone he knew in the Maricopa County DA's office. The document my son-in-law had wanted my daughter to sign turned out to be a power of attorney with some very quietly buried language. The kind of language that, in the hands of someone motivated, could have made a significant portion of my estate accessible before I was gone. It had been prepared by an attorney who, as it turned out, had done similar work for similar clients before. That thread, once pulled, unraveled considerably. My son-in-law was not at home when the investigators came. He was, as it happened, at lunch with the same attorney who drafted the document. They found him there. I understand he was surprised. My daughter called me that evening. She was at a friend's house. Her voice was very steady. The way voices get when someone has been crying for a long time and has temporarily run out. Did you know? She asked. I suspected for a long time, I said. I only knew for certain 10 days ago. Why didn't you tell me sooner? Because I needed to be sure before I asked you to upend your life. She was quiet for a while. Then she said, the quail came through the yard today. I was sitting on your porch, waiting for you to get home. I counted 7 of them. Your mother counted 8. She may have been inventing some. She laughed. It was a real laugh, the kind that costs something. The formal proceedings took several months. I won't walk through all of them, that's not really the story. The story is simpler. A man calculated that I was aging and distracted by grief, and perhaps less sharp than I'd once been. He calculated wrong. He had been calculating wrong for years, measuring me against his expectations of what a 69-year-old retired insurance broker would notice, what he would do with what he noticed, how much he would want to protect his peace in his final years rather than disrupt it. He didn't know that I had spent 41 years in a business built entirely on assessing risk. He didn't know that I had watched him since the first handshake. He didn't know that his one involuntary glance at a champagne glass had told me everything I needed to know about what the rest of the evening meant. He didn't know my daughter, not really. He'd mistaken her grace for passivity, her patience for compliance. She was her mother's daughter in every way that mattered. The trust restructuring completed 6 months after the party. The charitable portion, a significant share directed toward a scholarship fund at the state university in memory of my wife, was the piece that had apparently caused the most concern on his end. Money that was going to go somewhere it couldn't be redirected. He had been trying to solve a problem that was, in his mind, urgent. He solved it the wrong way. I think about the moment at the bar sometimes. The moment I picked up the new glass instead of the old one. It wasn't a decision, exactly. It was a reflex trained by decades of watching people. I've asked myself whether I should have done something differently. Called someone immediately, made a scene, handled it some other way. Maybe, but I think about the expression on my son-in-law's face across the backyard. Across 40 people in the light of a setting Arizona sun, and I think he believed he was the most careful person in the room. He was wrong. My daughter is doing well. She has a good attorney of her own now, Gordon's recommendation. She has her mother's quail and her mother's garden and her mother's particular ability to find the exact right thing to do next, even when the ground has shifted entirely. She called me last Sunday to tell me one of the quail appears to have a new chick, a small one, trailing behind the rest of the family, learning the pattern. I told her that was good news. She said she thought so too. There's something I've come to believe. After 69 years of watching people make calculations about what they can take and from whom and when, greed doesn't make you clever. It makes you focused. And focus, in the end, is just a narrowed field of vision. You see the thing you want. You stop seeing everything else. Everything else, in my experience, is where the real information lives. I'm grateful for the life I've built. I'm grateful for the people in it who showed me who they were. All of them in their different ways. I'm grateful for a daughter who folded a paper towel quietly in her kitchen and told me what I needed to know. I'm grateful for a wife who named the quail 3 times over because the names brought her joy. And I'm grateful for whatever instinct made me ask the bartender for a fresh glass that evening. That quiet, unannounced recognition that something in the room had changed, and the only reasonable response was to change along with it. Some lessons take a lifetime to earn. The ones that stick are almost never the ones you learn from a book. I've thought a lot about what actually happened at that party. Not the legal part, that resolved itself the way these things do when the evidence is clear and the intentions were clearly not. I mean the human part, the part where a man looked at me across a backyard full of people and saw someone he could outmaneuver. That's the thing about a certain kind of calculation. It requires you to see the other person as less than they are. Nate had built an entire picture of me in his head, aging, grieving, distracted by loss, eager for peace in the years I had left. And in that picture, I was manageable. I was a problem with a solution. He wasn't cruel in the way people imagine cruelty. He was just deeply, thoroughly wrong about who he was dealing with. I don't say that with pride. I say it because I think it matters. The mechanism of it. When we underestimate people, we're not really seeing them at all. We're seeing the story we've already decided to believe, and a story you've already decided is one you stop checking against reality. I checked reality for 41 years. Every policy I ever wrote, every client I ever sat across from, every claim I ever assessed, all of it was an exercise in paying attention to what was actually in front of me, not what I expected to find. That discipline doesn't retire when you do. It's not a professional habit. It becomes the way you move through a room. My daughter had it too. She knew something was wrong before she could name it. She held on to the detail about that document for weeks, not panicking, not confronting, just holding it carefully until the moment she could hand it to someone who knew what to do with it. That kind of steadiness isn't passivity, it's its own form of strength. And I watched her mother practice it for 37 years before I watched my daughter do the same thing in her own kitchen. There's a cause and effect buried in all of this that I keep coming back to. Nate's plan depended on my being diminished. Every step he took, the document, the positioning at the party, the careful watching, all of it required me to be less observant, less capable, less present than I actually was. His strategy contained its own failure from the beginning. He built it on a false foundation, and false foundations don't hold weight. That's not luck. That's not fate in any mystical sense. It's just the arithmetic of reality. When your plan requires other people to be smaller than they are, the plan is already broken. You just don't know it yet. What I want to pass on. To my daughter. To anyone who finds themselves in a moment where someone has decided they know exactly what you're capable of, is this: keep showing up as the full version of yourself. Not loudly, not defensively, just fully. The people who are counting on your diminishment have no contingency plan for your wholeness. Bev called me last week to finalize the last of the scholarship transfers. The first recipients will be announced in the spring. My wife used to say that the best thing you could do with good fortune was make sure it didn't stop with you. I think about that every time I sign one of those documents. I think about the quail in the yard. I think about my daughter's laugh on the phone. Some people spend their whole lives they get very good at it, and then they meet someone who was never going to give them what they were after, and the whole architecture comes down. Not because of anything dramatic, just because the math was wrong from the start.